Ecological succession is basically the process through which a dead, lifeless field, maybe there was a tornado, an earthquake, restores itself, goes back to a full forest, a full prairie, a mature ecosystem. And if you want to regenerate your grass lawn to a food forest or pollinator garden, or even an industrial cornfield back to regenerative agriculture, you don't do that by simply putting the right plants in the ground. You need to understand this process of ecological succession. What would happen over the course of 100 years if you were to just let this process play out naturally, and how to harness and speed up that process. So ecological succession is really interesting. For a long time in ecology, we kind of considered mature ecosystems as fully developed ecosystems. We started to realize that actually there really is no mature ecosystem in any large area. Overall, 10% of that area is constantly being disturbed. It's called the dynamic mosaic understanding of ecological maturity, which basically means that disturbance is part of ecological maturity. Part of ecological maturity is certain areas being set back to square one and regenerating over time. Of course, the surrounding area helps provide the species and everything for them to do that. But part of regeneration is that it's really natural. We need to understand this is a natural process. If you take an old, dirty field, old lifeless field, weeds are going to come first because weeds are soil builders. They pull the most organic matter and nutrients from the soil. They grow quickly, they're resilient. From there, and I'm going to basically explain what ecological succession looks like and then how to harness and speed that up. So you have weeds first, right? People often think weeds are a problem in their garden. In a food forest, you need to understand weeds are there because of what stage of ecological succession you're in. You don't avoid weeds by weeding the garden or getting rid of the seeds, but by having an ecosystem that is beyond that stage of ecology. You don't see a bunch of weeds going and taking over the forest. Of course, there's some invasive plants, but overall, it's not a problem. Weeds are there in disturbed ground, oxygenated, disturbed, dirty soil. Dirty, by dirty, I just mean bare. Bare, that's the right word. So, bare soil. Weeds are very valuable ecologically. They protect the soil. Bare soil can easily become lifeless. All the life can be taken away, can be killed, compacted, turned into deadpan. Next thing you know, it's a desert. Weeds are there to prevent that from happening, to build up the soil. In nature, you have the weeds come in for a year, a couple years, and next thing you know, the soil is a bit better. Weeds are very leafy. There's not much wood. Because of that, when they decompose, you get a bacterial dominated soil. Bacterial dominated soils, basically, like, think of it like this: there's a scale on one side from bacterial to fungal soil. Fungal is the most forest like, the most mature. Bacterial is the most weedy. Somewhere in between, you have a prairie land. There's a bit of woodiness starting to form. A bacterial soil will support slightly woodier plants, just slightly more stems. Those plants will decompose into a slightly less bacterial, slightly more fungal soil. Those plants, in turn, as they decompose, will create soil that just subtly favors slightly more woody plants. So those slightly more woody plants decompose. And so there's this kind of process where the soil that one set of plants produces actually supports and favors more ecologically complex plants. So you think you have this like lifeless grass lawn, you're just going to go put a tree in. It's probably not going to do too well. That's a dead, ecologically dead, bacterially dominated soil from the grass. And it's really fascinating that the soil that one ecosystem, one stage produces actually supports the next stage. This ecological succession is just baked into ecosystems. It just happens. It's this like emergent phenomenon that's come from all these plants, microbiology, and how they just develop over time. So that's what happens in nature. You have a dead, lifeless field, and it's just slowly, step by step, the soil from one set of plants starts to become more fungal and actually dominate more woody plants. And of course, some ecosystems are mature at a prairie stage, but in a forest ecosystem, this just keeps happening and happening until you have full blown trees. You go from prairie to shrubland to woodland to dense forest. And so, how does this apply to food forestry? Obviously, it's not just the fungal level of the soil, it's the entire soil food web, the entire ecology. Things like the pH, even as the soil becomes more fungal, the pH becomes lower, it becomes more acidic as well. Different species become introduced, and it just always favors maturity, always moving towards ecological maturity. So If you have a dead lifeless grass lawn, you probably don't want to wait 100 years. You don't want to just slowly let this process unfold. So, what's the easiest way to jump ahead in this process? Like I said, you're not going to just go put some trees in your grass lawn. That might do okay. Over time, the leaves will come down and build better soil. What you want to do is put down like 6 layers of wood chips. Why are we putting down 6 layers of wood chips when we're establishing a food forest? And why don't we do that with prairies? With prairies, we might want to put a thinner layer of wood chips, and there it's mostly for mulch. The deep wood chips, some people even put up to a foot with a little bit of compost. What are wood chips? It's wood. What do those wood chips come from? Actual trees. It's hardwood. It's very high in the stage of ecological succession. So the number one step in creating a food forest is to create food forest soil. So you put down a bunch of wood chips. Yeah, the soil underneath is a bit more bacterial. Through ecology, through the soil food web, it gets integrated over time. But that's how you just jumpstart the process. The first step to building a food forest is to put down a shit ton of wood chips to create that fungal soil, that acidic soil, high in organic matter. You're basically creating a forest floor. You take all these wood chips from trees that got trimmed and you're creating forest soil. So that's a really good way to jumpstart ecological succession. From there, you put in a bunch of trees. You put in the full layer of all the layers of trees, shrubs, bushes, herbaceous ground cover, vines, and it makes use of that soil, integrates it into the system, and continues to pump out more organic matter. You have dynamic accumulators. You have trees that are dropping leaves and sticks and twigs, and you need fungi. Oftentimes, though, a lot of these microorganisms come in when you have the right soil. It's actually, I mean, there's a lot of industry, there's a big industry around mycorrhizal inoculants. You want to inoculate your soil with mycorrhizal fungi so that you can have these mycorrhizal fungi that form a symbiotic relationship with your plants to help make nutrients more bioavailable, to protect their immune systems. You want saprotrophic fungi. Do you really think you need to put these in the system? Any kind of wood chip is going to get decomposed. The fungi are there. You just need to put the right physical structure for them to come in. And over time, microbiological diversity will come in, develop. You're not killing things, you're not tilling the soil. Like, as far as having fungi in the soil, the fungi are there. If you're tilling your soil, even shoveling up your garden bed, these little hyphae from the mycelium are so fragile that when you just break the soil, it completely kills off the fungi. So you have undisturbed soil. Over time, everything comes in, the ecosystem matures, but you can really you need to understand this process of ecological succession and why, when you're building a food forest, the most important thing is to get quality wood chips, ideally from a diversity of trees, from trees that don't have allelopathic chemicals. What is that? Something like black walnut. The tree puts out chemicals that suppress the growth of other plants so that it can grow better. If you want to grow black walnut, you're simply going to put black walnut allelopathy resistant plants around there. But for the base of your food forest, you don't want things like black walnut, eucalyptus, as the source of those wood chips. So it's pretty much that simple. You get wood chips from trees that weren't chemically treated. Even just tree trimming trees from those companies is pretty good. A variety of trees, and you don't want a bunch of black walnut. You put it there, and then what are you going to do? You're going to heavily water it to bring it to life, to get it to decompose. You don't want this to be a mulch layer on top. No, this is your soil. It's not just mulch. This is actually soil. That's the idea there. So you want to put in a little bit of compost with some nitrogen, some different nutrients, and that'll balance out the wood chips. The wood chips will help soak up that nitrogen. Yeah, another really interesting thing, the forms of nitrogen. As you go through ecological succession, there's different forms of nitrites, nitrates, how they break down, how they form. That's a whole other thing to talk about. But yeah, that's basically the video. You got to understand this. If you're building a food forest, you want to understand the deeper layer of what's going on there so you do these things properly. That's why we're putting down 6, even 8, 10, 12 inches of wood chips when we're starting a food forest.